what's going on, guys? It's me, Train Man, and welcome back to the Zombie Train, episode 181, I think? Should be 181. Anyways, today we are working on parts of the old main, the same area that we worked on before, although this area is more or less running towards completion. I did a few things that I didn't expect to do, and then a few things that I kind of wanted to do, and also a bunch of ideas just kind of came to me, and we rolled with them. But anyways, I could explain, I felt kind of clever when I was doing some of this, but then again, it was 4 in the morning, everything feels clever. So that's why this video is late, for the record. I came home late and worked on the video very, very late, and then went to sleep, because I didn't feel like I was in particularly good shape to do post-commentary over it. So here we are at 5 in the afternoon, the following day, doing post-commentary. Anyways, today the subject of the commentary is Hawaii and Alaska. This is asked by the Shortline Gamer Does KSP and East Rail. If I can find the exact wordings of the comments here. So I'm guessing Hawaii survived then, and is there any use for narrow gauge locomotives? I've said before I'll talk about narrow gauge locomotives when I can actually get Weibel on the show, because, again, I didn't do much with them, but he would probably have a better idea of what happened to them. And then Shortline Gamer KSP straight up just asks what happens in Hawaii and Alaska. Now, Alaska's worth talking about. I didn't do very much in Alaska. I hardly ever did anything in Alaska, because it was so far away, so segmented. We tossed around some old plans to connect it to the lower 48 via rail link through Canada, but these plans never came to fruition, sort of similar to the real-life analog of these plans. The fact of the matter was, the Alaska Railroad and the White Pass and Yukon weren't of very much use to us. They didn't do an awful lot. Mostly because they were out in the middle of nowhere and they were completely disconnected. And when that happens, you know, we were never going to reach them by any conventional means. We would have had to fly and boat up there. And that was going to be too much. And we, admittedly, especially with the Enterprise, we did it a couple of times. We went up to Alaska a couple of times, mostly in search of people. Because Alaska is big, and it's cold, and it's north, and it's kind of where everyone was retreating to when the Great Panic actually happened. Everyone figured, oh, the zombies will freeze like corpuscles. And that wasn't completely incorrect. But it's worth pointing out that when you get that many people running to the same place, the problem no longer is the zombies, the problem is the people. And that indeed led to plenty of problems, and you ended up with just a few hardy or a few very lucky families or individuals surviving, versus the initial rush of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people trying to escape from the zombies. It's part of the other reason so many people died. You know, when the Great Panic happened, and I know I've said this before, but when the Great Panic happened, it's estimated that more people died as a direct result of other humans during the Great Panic than had died from zombies to that point. And most people call the Great Panic, or, you know, recognize the Great Panic as the start of the Zombie War, or the start of World War Z, but things were going on long before the Great Panic actually happened. You had things like the Alpha teams that were out there dispatching small groups of zombies when we really didn't realize how bad things were getting. And you had places succumbing already. But, you know, things were just kept under wraps for the most part. Anyways, so up in Alaska, you got a lot of people running away. And you got a lot of people freezing to death when they ran out of supplies. So, and a lot of people killing each other when they ran out of food. Stuff like that. You know, the wildlife was plenty, except when the zombies came around, then there was no wildlife. And then you've got weakened, starving, freezing humans that have barely survived a winter in Alaska, and have now got Zax knocking on the door. So, Alaska did become important long after the Zombie Train Incorporated began, and the reason for that is oil. And that's when the plans to, we should reconnect the Alaska Railroad, or we should connect the Alaska Railroad to the international system of the Canadian, U.S., Mexico. I'll talk about Canada and Mexico later. I believe somebody asked specifically about that. Oh, well, actually, episode 185 is Mexico and Central America. Speaking of which, running out of questions here. Throw me some questions. So, Alaska, right? We wanted to connect it, and it was eventually connected. But before then, we had, managed to get everything running in a modern sense. We didn't need steam engines at that point. So this was long after Unfriendly Seas. This was after we'd gotten our oil production back, and that's why Alaska was suddenly important again. But yeah, it was a resource for that. It was a resource for people, whoever did survive. It wasn't much of a resource for anything else, because it's Alaska. The teams did go up there in search of frozen zombies to kill in every spring thaw. That was kind of a big thing. It was kind of important. Because, at that point they were mobilized, and you can take care of them. Now, the other question being Hawaii. Now, I didn't have a hell of a lot of use for Hawaii. Mostly because it's way out there. We probably visited it a couple of times during maybe the mid-days of the Zombie Train Incorporated, if not the latter days. As the U.S. Navy moved its presence back out there and began to get a handle on what was going on in the Pacific Ocean. There were, as has been mentioned, there were missing Russian submarines, nuclear submarines with nuclear missiles that nobody knew where they were. Not us, not the Russians. And that was very concerning, so we were on the hunt for them. There were a lot of little places out there where people would gather, islands that were formerly uninhabited and became home to many shipborne individuals. Running away by boat was one of the other things that just about everyone thought was their original idea and tried to do. And this led to a lot of clogged waterways, it led to a lot of dead, floating boats, it led to a lot of boats just with zombies on them, because if you say something the size of a cruise ship, you get one zombie on it, it's entirely likely that you're going to have an outbreak. Because it'll take some people by surprise, and, it's not like they're the military, there may be people with guns on board, whether that be security or what, but they may be hesitant to use them, they may be not educated on how to properly destroy or kill a zombie, or, think about on a little, family boat, people, a lot of the time having misconceptions about, well, this zombie was my... formerly my mother, she'll remember me, she won't hurt me. Wrong. I already covered that zombies have no memory of their former lives. It's just what happens. So, Hawaii then. Hawaii became a sort of gathering point, but not the main islands. The main islands of Hawaii were dead zones, because they were completely, basically boxed in. There was no escape from Hawaii. You could get in a boat and leave, but if you lived on the island, general cases, you're not getting off the island, and you're going to get eaten by the zombies on the island. Now, this was... I'll be completely honest, I don't know the islands' names, I'm looking them up right now, but on the bigger ones, this was more of a problem than on the smaller ones, especially the less inhabited ones. The more people you've got, the more problem it's going to be. But the island of Hawaii itself, it was a little bit more of a problem than elsewhere, but Oahu was definitely the worst for that. Think about it, Hawaii is not particularly population dense, but you've got some people on there, and a lot of the land is, almost inhospitable. And also, volcanoes. But yeah, Oahu definitely got the worst, and it was a very, very long military campaign to get back Oahu, because they wanted the military base, they wanted the supplies there. When we flew out to Oahu, and this was again after they had reclaimed the place. This was not something they needed or wanted our help with. So that was that. We didn't do a hell of a lot with the railroads. I know they had the plantation railroads out there, and to an extent they were important for food. But we had plenty of food once we cleared out areas in the Midwest. We also had some pretty advanced stuff. You know, when worse comes to worse like that, the military cuts loose. Or the government cuts loose. There's no one to tell you, hey, don't use this. Hey, don't blah, blah, blah. You know, this is classified. Yeah, well, not classified anymore, because, you know, what? It's not classified anymore because we needed to survive, you know. Some pretty, what's the word? Some pretty hefty, like, hydroponics, genetic manipulation of plants, stuff like that, you know, strains of plants that would otherwise be, you know, not dangerous to use, but the kind of things where they're almost modified to act like an invasive species. They have no predators or anything like that. Unfortunately, no one managed to make use of the Solanum virus in keeping wildlife away from something, other than, you know, hanging up zombie corpses. But it's worth not using that in a plant, because any dose of Solanum, Solanum-infected flesh will kill you, and probably Solanum-infected plants if you manage to do that. I don't know how you'd do that, but if you managed to, that would be the way, you know, you'd be dead. The plantation engines were kept on the island for use there. They began, this is the narrow gauge that I do know about. They began a project of, okay, well, let's expand this and get some use out of these engines, get some use out of this stuff. So I didn't really spearhead this, but they saw what we were doing and decided, oh, it must be very useful to have train tracks all over the place, and so they did that. And I was fairly impressed by this happening. But I guess that was just the way things were going to be. Now, people did try to escape to Hawaii, as I've said, via boat. Most of them didn't make it. It was more likely that you'd make it to the Great White North than it would be that you'd make it to Hawaii, especially if you're just in a sailboat and you're not equipped to go across half the Pacific Ocean. Well, a few people made it, a few people didn't. Some people were lost at sea for many, many years. When we were heading out there in the Enterprise, we spotted a couple of smaller boats. I would always try to toss them a line. And of course this is many years afterwards, so these smaller boats that we found did not have living individuals on them. Allegedly, the U.S. Navy collected a lot of people and boats on their initial forays around the West Coast, just people trying to bail out. And, you know, finally realizing, hey, it's a bad idea, but not really being able to make it back to shore. And so they'd just turn on emergency radio and hope that help would come. And sometimes help would come, but most of the time, you'd either get what were essentially pirates. You know, people, you know, the bandits of the high seas, which definitely were a thing. We just never had to deal with them too much, because we stayed on land. Or you'd get, or you'd get no help at all. You know, and sometimes you get whatever, you know, somebody virtuous, or you'd get the Navy, or you'd get, you know, what was left of the Coast Guard. They weren't really a thing anymore, but, or, you know, if you were in the Atlantic, you might get Zombie Train Inc. If it was late enough. But again, that sort of happened more early on in the war, because by the time the Zombie Train Inc. came around, every idiot that got off in a boat was either back to shore or dead. Anyways, Train Man out.